Hi, good morning, and welcome to the ZP vlog and podcast. We do this every Sunday at 8 a.m. London time, and we'll jump into it. And really, the ZP vlog and podcast is really about catching up or summarizing news from Zimmer Peacock for this week. So, one of the pieces of news or technology that we've discussed this week, and I'll discuss it again in a bit, but I'll discuss a slightly different feature, which is something called a UDC, the Universal Data Converter. So the UDC allows us, for example, to open up files. So there's a sort of one of the manufacturers of potentiostats. I wonder if there's even something like 50 manufacturers in the world, but one of the manufacturers of potentiostats in this world is PalmSense. They have a proprietary software system called PS Trace, and the file output there is PS Session. Now, what we've done at ZP is enabled a microservice within Julie. So Julie is a cloud database. It's able to receive, store, process, and allow you to share data, and specifically electrochemical data at the moment. It's really quite good at that. Anyway, Julie is this great database. You can sign up for free. We'll discuss that in a bit. And what it now allows you to do is through this microservice is actually open up P session files and convert them to text, comma separated variable, or also XLSX. That's the XL most recent file format. So great little microservice that ZP has rolled out on Julie. And as I say, Julie is something you can actually sign up for free. Now I'm going to go to the next bit, which is, I just said it, but now I'll also emphasize it. If you're following the vlog, you'll see this, but Zimmer Peacock, we do have a database called Julie. We describe ourselves, and I'll discuss this as well, as sensor to API company. It's really important because what it says is that we have a sensor. We'll talk about electronics in a bit, and the electronics can send the data to the cloud. So we consider ourselves sensor to cloud. But then further than cloud, it's actually sensor to API, application programming interface. And if you want to get onto the Julie platform, just know the barrier to getting on is very low, because we actually allow you to sign up for free. And when you've done that, you've basically got 30 days. It doesn't demand any kind of credit card from you either. So thank you to the ZP engineers. We've got a freemium version. You can sign up. There's no credit card required, and you can start essentially playing with Julie. So I really appreciate the guys doing that. Now, I keep using this term sensor to API, and as part of that sensor, something I'm very excited about this week is actually the lactose sensor. Lactose, some people unfortunately are intolerant to it. It appears a lot in dairy products. And at Zimmer Peacock, as part of our kind of sensor to API technology, we do have a lactose sensor as well. So what we're what we expect is that people will, developers of technologies will be able to get these lactose sensors off us. They'll be able to get onto our sensor to API platform. So for example, we link to what we call Sense It All on our website. But it does say, you can get this sensor, you can plug it into one of our platforms, and you can get that data to cloud. So it really helps in the rapid development of sensors, in this case, for measuring dairy products and determining how much lactose is in there, which I think there are some statutory requirements around doing that. So that was a nice technology development from the engineers this week, and it's very much appreciated. Staying on sensors, but a different thing at this point is the ZP team put out a really nice video this week where they actually talked about one of our flow cells. They showed our flow cell in conjunction with a pump and with a potentiostat, and just showed that it was possible to have biosensors in flow streams. And you can, obviously we link to it. We link to the video underneath with showing you where you can get these various technologies. But it was a nice demonstration by one of our engineers of how to put one of these sensors into the flow stream, and it does demonstrate that, at ZP we kind of have a holistic view, really, that every time we find like a technology need, we'll essentially develop that technology to fulfill that need. So a nice video from the guys this week about using electrochemical sensors and screen printed electrodes in flow streams, which is part of, it's definitely one of the applications for that kind of sensing technology. Now, also, we've really, of recent, really increased the number of workshops that we like to run. So if we look at the workshops that we've run so far this year, first one was in May 2022. That was in Sigues, Spain, as part of the Biosensors Congress. We had a workshop in Horton, where people from all over the world flew in, and we talked about CGM. We also are having 2 conferences in October, and the only thing that's slightly delaying these at the moment, there's one at IIT Bombay and one at SSN College of in India. The only reason that's slightly delaying at the moment is we're just trying to figure out visa issues. Due to COVID-19, there's still some sort of visa restrictions around the world, and one of those is affecting our ability to get to India, but we will solve it and we will go there. Now, what is more certain is we do have a workshop in the US, in San Diego, on the 10th of November. Flights between, for example, Europe and US are definitely open, and we will be doing that one, and that will be around CGM. And then we also have 2 more Norwegian conferences this year, one in Horton again, which is on the 30th and 1st of November. That's around CGM. And we also have a workshop in Grenoble, second week, just before Christmas. So just sneaking in at the end of the year there, we're doing a workshop in Grenoble around continuous glucose monitoring and wearable sensors as well. So I'm just going to transition to the final notes. I think this is quite significant. At Zimmer Peacock, I keep using this term, sensor to API. So we make sensors. A good example of sensors is our lactose sensor. I just want to say a morning to Armat. Nice to see you this morning. It's been a while. So I'm going to just talk about something that may be of particular interest to you. Embedded biosensor electronics. So over the years, sensors and electronics around biosensing have got smaller and smaller. I think electrochemistry in particular really opens the opportunity for shrinking sensors. I've said this before, but it is easier to generate a voltage and measure a current, for example. I mean, this is, now when I say easier, for example, sometimes generating light, even with LEDs, is fairly energy intensive. And then those photons that you generate, for example, from an LED, they may have to interact with some chemicals, and it's that interaction that could be the source of your signal. But interaction with photons photons are quite penetrating. They don't necessarily interact with materials that well. And in order to get a strong interaction and therefore a strong signal, you possibly need quite a lot of sample. Whereas with electrochemistry, we're actually trying to measure, rather than photons, we're trying to measure electrons. And I've said it before, but electrons have mass and charge. Photons have no mass and no charge. So it's actually easier to measure electrons, for example, in the form of flowing current, than it is to measure photons. And the reason I've said all that is because that's the fundamental reason why I think that electrochemical biosensors are more shrinkable and lower power than their optical equivalent. Now, having said all that, the reason I've brought it up is because at ZP, we've ended up shrinking now the electronics to be something the size of our finger. And I mention it because, for example, if you're watching the vlog this morning, I'm showing 2 sets of data. One of the sets of data is a glucose sensor measured on a laboratory instrument. And one of the sets of data is a glucose sensor measured on our embedded solution. And anyone who's looking, the offset is due to sensor variability, but the sensitivity is very conserved between the 2 examples. So what does this say? It says that in some ways the development now of new analog electronics for biosensors like glucose and lactate and oxygen, sodium, potassium. It's become more of a coding game rather than a design game. Because what we've done at ZP now is we've allowed people to use our embedded electronics solution. They can essentially buy it off our website. They can add a note when buying it to say whether it's for glucose or lactate, and then we'll flash the necessary parameters onto the board. And so we're showing people that, how the price breaks down with volume. Because what happens is people get stuck on, they're in a development effort. They want to make some sort of, for example, SMBG, self-monitoring blood glucose strip. So they come to ZP for the sensor. We can give them the sensor, and then you actually find that they get stuck on the electronics. So we want to remove as many barriers as possible, and so we've actually come up with this single-purpose circuit. People can choose whether they want it for glucose, lactate, or any of our biosensors. Our biosensors are actually rather extensive, so I'm not going to read the range this morning, but I think that really reduces the barrier to market entry for people. So that was just some news from Zimmer Peacock on embedded electronics. I mentioned it earlier on because our whole technology stack is, so for example, today I've mentioned lactose sensors. Now I've mentioned electronics. We live in an IoT world, an Internet of Things world, so people really want to get their data up to the cloud. I've mentioned Julie already, but I've also mentioned the UDC, the Universal Data Converter. So if you gather your data, whether it's on a PalmSense potentiostat or some other potentiostat, we can view the data up there. This is probably particularly relevant to RMET as well, because if you're developing an open source platform, as long as we give you some design rules, you can upload your data to Julie as well. But the reason I'm talking about UDC, Universal Data Converter, is to say that we can open, for example, PalmSense files using this UDC, this Universal Data Converter, but it's got a little advantage when opening up things like PalmSense files. P-Session files, which is the formal name for these PalmSense files, you can run several experiments and they can all end up in one file. When you're trying to do sort of databases and looking at data, it's quite annoying because you actually have to get all of these different experiments out of the same session. But what the UDC does is it actually runs the P-Session file and exports them all as individual files, either as text, comma-separated variable, or XLSX, XL format. It exports them as individual files, and I think that's a real advantage when you're trying to run databases and do a lot more data manipulation. Getting them out of one file into several files I think is a super useful feature. It's something that we use quite a lot. I have said it rather a lot, but we do consider ourselves to be a sensor to API company. That means that we can help people on the sensors. We obviously have a super large range of biosensors. We can help people on the Sense It All platform. So we got the electronics, we can send the data to the cloud, and we also obviously then have the cloud as well. So we are just highlighting that during the week as well. Now, at Zimmer Peacock, what's really important to us sometimes is also applications. When I mean applications, getting sensors into situations that they weren't, that there's demanding situations. Let me give you an example of a demanding situation. Trying to put sensors into bioreactors can be quite tough. And so what we've done this week is shown that we have these rod adapters that allow us to take our sensors off the web store and essentially embed them in a rod format. And if we embed them in a rod format, then that will allow us to then put the sensors into bioreactors. So that's a nice feature, let's say, and something that we have definitely done this week. So at Zimmer Peacock, we describe ourselves as sensors to API, but we also have to kind of consider applications as well. That every time a new engineering team comes to a new application, then ZP is able to often support that application, because we're quite experienced, so if it's measuring glucose in people, that's fine. If it's measuring glucose in fish, it's fine. And if it's measuring glucose in bioreactors, for example, we're also fine with that, and the food industry. Now, this week, we have a little news article that's called La meilleure entreprise de biocapteurs en France. And this is just really homage to our sister company in France called Madalex. I think one of the things that makes Zimmer Peacock quite unusual is we're extremely entrepreneurial. And because we're a private company, we're not so large, we're 85 people. This means that we can be nimble and entrepreneurial. And so what we have done here is we've teamed up with Youssef in France. He runs a very successful business, in part doing his own sensor developments, but also distributing Zimmer Peacock products. And I was with Youssef at a conference in France called MedFit. So it's just kind of, it's more of a sort of, we're not so much talking here about technology, but we are talking about commercials as well. So this week we're in Grenoble. We were with our sister company run by Youssef, who is the CEO at Madalex, and we had a nice conference in France. And then finally, at 8 a.m. every Thursday London time, we like to do our webinar for our ZP Developers Own members. And this week we talked about detection of ammonium hydroperoxide. We talked about which techniques to use with which sensors. And with that one, we did highlight that one of the best places now is actually our workshops. We did talk about glucose, lactate, and nitric oxide sensing. We talked about alcohol sensing. And we also talked in our webinar about our new single purpose sensor circuits. So I think with that, I will sort of round up and say, thank you if you're listening to our vlog and podcast. If you have any questions of Zimmer Peacock, and I appreciate Armat's coming on this morning, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And we will be doing our ZP Developer Zone webinar at 8 a.m. on Thursday, and we have some detailed questions come in, so I have to prepare the answers to those for Thursday. So in the meantime, take care. Thank you very much, and speak to some of you on Thursday in